Welcome back, everyone. Ready for another deep dive? This time, we're going way back, like way, way back.
Over 1,000 years.
More. Think 14 centuries ago to Medina.
Mm.
It's a story that shows how, some things just never change. Like no matter what time period you're in, you've got deceit, you've got bias, people wanting justice. It's all there,
Yeah.
in this story. We'll be exploring a theft, a cover-up, and a really clever web of deception, all spun by this guy named Tume.
Or when you look at the sources that talk about Tume, it's fascinating, how they describe him. It's like they're painting this really vivid picture.
What do they say?
Well, they talk about him having this long tongue. And they say he's known for this, like, mischievous behavior, almost like a trickster. And to him, deception was like the skill, like being clever.
Wow.
There's even this story, this anecdote about him writing, like, these offensive poems and then saying someone else wrote them just to cause trouble.
So he was like stirring the pot just for fun,
Yeah.
using words as weapons, you could say.
Yeah, exactly. Like centuries before, Twitter wars and all that.
So this mischievous poet guy, how does he end up becoming the mastermind of like a major theft? What happened?
Well, so the stolen items were pretty valuable. We're talking armor, weapons, and get this, a sack of white flour.
Flour.
Yeah, flour. And all this stuff belonged to this man named Rifâa. And it's actually Rifâa's nephew, a guy named Katâde, who gives us this really detailed account of what went down. He's our main source for this story. And get this, that flour ends up being like a crucial clue in the investigation.
And flour.
Picture this, a trail of flour leading the investigators straight to the suspect's house. Like it's almost like a 7th century version of, those breadcrumb trails in fairy tales.
That's pretty clever detective work for the time, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, flour as evidence.
Mm-hmm.
But hold on, if the trail leads right to Tume, how does he get away with it?
This is where Tume's like cunning side really comes out. He knows he's the prime suspect, right? So what does he do? He plants the stolen shield with his neighbor, Zeyd Semîn, who happened to be Jewish. And you got to remember, this is Medina over 1,400 years ago, a time where religious tensions were, pretty high.
So he's playing the religious card, knowing it could easily sway people's opinions.
That's exactly it. He's banking on those biases, knowing people will jump to conclusions, and sadly, it works.
Really?
Oh, yeah. Tume rallies his own tribe, the Zafer, and other Muslims. They start putting pressure on the prophet to rule against Zeyd. They're framing it like, a Muslim being wronged by a Jew.
Wow. So he's like pulling out all the stops, using every trick he knows to manipulate the situation. But I mean, did everyone just accept his claims? No questions asked.
You got to understand the context. This is centuries before we had anything like, modern forensics. No CSI Medina, right?
It makes you think about how easy it was for people to be manipulated, especially when you're in a society where your religious identity, it means everything.
Yeah, and for a while, it seemed like Tume had pulled it off. Like his plan was working. Based on what everyone was saying and, the pressure from the community, the prophet, it seemed like he was about to rule against Zeyd. But just as he's about to deliver the judgment...
Oh, this is where it gets good, right? Give me the cliffhanger. What happened next?
Okay, so just as the prophet's about to make his decision, verses 105 onwards of the Nisa Surah, they're revealed, and they expose Tume's whole scheme.
Wait, hold on. The Nisa Surah. For those of us who, might not be as familiar, can you give us a little background?
Sure. So the Nisa Surah, it's one of the chapters in the Quran, and it deals with a lot of things, social conduct, family matters, justice within the community. But in this case, the verses that are revealed, they're speaking to everyone. Like, it doesn't matter what your faith is. If you're in a situation like this, these verses apply to you.
So it's like a direct message, like boom, cutting through all of Tume's lies.
Exactly. The timing couldn't be more perfect, right? It's like a spotlight suddenly shining on the truth.
Game changer. I bet everyone was like, totally shocked.
Well, absolutely. And you know what verse 105 says? It says, "Indeed, we have revealed to you the book in truth so that you might judge between the people by that which Allah has shown you. And do not be an advocate for the deceitful." Mic drop.
Wow. But what's really amazing is that this event, it happened over 1,400 years ago, and it still has lessons for us today.
You're telling me. That's what makes this deep dive so fascinating. It's not just a cold story. It's something that makes you think about your own biases, how we understand justice and the consequences of, deception. And we'll get into all that in part 2. So, picking up where we left off, let's really dig into these Quranic verses that came down because of Tume's, deception. It's like this event, something from over 14 centuries ago. It set off this whole exploration of justice and truth and being accountable, stuff that still matters to us.
Yeah, for sure. So we've got this amazing story, right? This intervention, like out of nowhere. But what do the verses actually say? Like, why do they still matter to us today, living in the 21st century?
Well, one of the things that really stands out in these verses is how they're totally against defending people who do wrong. And it doesn't matter what religion they are, what tribe they belong to. It's like the text is super clear. If you support someone guilty, even if they're one of your own, you're betraying the truth. And that goes against divine justice. Think about it. A message from 1400 years ago telling people to put justice above, like tribal loyalty.
Wow. That's a strong message. It makes you think about putting aside those loyalties and standing up for what's right, even if it means like going against your own group. Makes you wonder if we've really come that far.
It really does. The Quran's not messing around. It says, do not argue on behalf of those who betray themselves. Indeed, Allah does not love one who is constantly treacherous and sinful.
Right.
And that whole concept of betraying yourself, it's really interesting, especially with Tume's story.
Betraying yourself. What does that even mean here? Is it just about like sinning, breaking the rules, or is there something more to it?
It goes deeper than just breaking rules. It's like when you choose to do things that contradict your own values. What you know is right and wrong. Look at Tumek. He knew that deception was wrong, but he did it anyway. He put himself first, above everyone else, so he betrayed his own conscience, his own potential to be good.
So it's like there's this gap between what you do and what you believe. Kind of like hypocrisy, right? Like we might talk about being honest, having integrity, but do we really live that way, especially when it's tough?
Exactly. And the Quran's pushing us to look at those choices, ask ourselves the hard questions. It's telling us to look inward, to make sure our actions match what we believe is true and right. And this message, it's just as important today with all the information overload we have and, the pressure to fit in with certain groups.
It makes you think. Are we being honest with ourselves, with our values? Do we compromise what we believe in just because it's easier or to be accepted or to get ahead? Do our biases, cloud our judgment even when we know better? The story is holding up a mirror to us.
That's a great way to put it. It's realizing that truth, sometimes, it takes effort. You got to be willing to step outside your comfort zone, challenge what you think you know.
And divine justice, that idea keeps coming up in this story. The idea that what you do has consequences.
Right.
That you can't escape being accountable. Doesn't matter how clever you think you are in hiding it.
Oh, yeah, totally. When everything's revealed, Tume's lies are exposed, and Rifâa, the guy who got robbed, he gets his stuff back. It's this powerful example of divine intervention, showing that the truth, it'll always come out, even if it takes a while. And this whole concept of divine justice, it's not just in this story or even just one religion. People everywhere want fairness, a system where actions have consequences.
It's like this cosmic reminder, right? Like you can't fool the universe. You might be able to trick other people, but in the end, someone's always watching. And there's something bigger than us that wants to make things right, to bring back balance. It's humbling, but kind of comforting too, I think.
It is. Reminds you that we're part of something bigger. What we choose to do, it matters, not just for us, but for everyone around us. And that brings us to another part of this story. What happened to Tume in the end and what we can learn from it. But we'll get to that in part 3.
So we've been talking about Tume, right? That guy from Medina over 1,400 years ago. And how his story, this whole thing with deception and divine intervention and those verses from the Quran, they give us these insights into justice, truth, and being accountable, things that are still relevant today. But what about Tume? What happened to him after everyone found out he was lying?
Well, after they figured out what he did, they exiled him from Medina. But the sources, they don't just stop there. They keep going with his story, and it doesn't sound like things went well for him.
So being kicked out, that wasn't enough for him to change. Like, didn't he learn his lesson after that whole public humiliation being cast out?
Doesn't seem like it. From what they say, he just kept on deceiving and doing criminal stuff. They caught him stealing again multiple times, and he got punished pretty harshly. Some people might even say he got some, divine warnings. But even with all that, it's like he never really got it, never really tried to change,
He got stuck, almost, like trapped in that cycle of lying and scheming. Makes you wonder, was he just not able to change? Or did he just not want to see that he was messing up?
It's a question people have been asking for centuries, right? Some might say it was his background, how he was raised, or the people around him that made it hard to choose a different path. Others might say he was just stubborn. stuck in his ways, even when it was clear they were leading him nowhere good.
It's tricky, isn't it? Free will versus how your environment shapes you. But even if we say, okay, maybe things outside of him had an influence, he still had to take responsibility for what he did, right?
Absolutely. It's important to look at the bigger picture. But in the end, we choose what we do. And while Tume's story might seem like, a warning about what happens when you keep sinning and don't regret it, the Quran, it offers more than just judgment. It gives hope, too.
So there's still a chance for redemption, even for someone like Tume, after a life of, messing up.
For sure. The Quran's big on the idea that if you truly regret what you've done and you sincerely want to change, then you can be forgiven and transformed no matter what you did before. It's never too late to turn away from the bad stuff, to ask for forgiveness and start living a better life, one aligned with truth and doing the right thing.
That's a powerful message, Second chances, even when you think you've blown it. It reminds us that what we did in the past, it doesn't have to be who we are forever. We can always choose a different path, even if we strayed way off track.
Exactly. The key is sincerity, A real commitment to changing your heart and your actions, admitting your mistakes, asking for forgiveness, making things right. Not just going through the motions, but actually changing how you live.
So even though Tume's story doesn't have a happy ending, there's this bigger message woven throughout, right? About hope, change, and how powerful it is to seek truth. So this story from so long ago can still teach us stuff today.
It really can. Tume might seem like ancient history, but the things his story deals with, they're still happening. Deception, justice, accountability, redemption, it's all still relevant. It makes us look at ourselves, the choices we make, our biases, how committed we are to the truth.
That's what makes this whole deep dive so interesting, right? It's not just some history lesson. It's showing us what it means to be human.
Yeah.
Making us ask ourselves tough questions. How do we deal with truth and justice? How do we hold ourselves accountable?
That's a great point. And maybe that's the biggest thing we can take away from this, that there's always a chance to change. Even when we see all this deception and wrongdoing, there's always a possibility for people to transform and come back to what's true.
That's a great way to wrap things up. So, everyone, as you go about your day, think about Tume's story. The choices we make, the things we say, the way we impact others. Choose truth, even when it's tough, and never underestimate how powerful it can be to seek forgiveness and make things right. Until next time, keep diving deep and keep searching for truth.